Non-exempt employees, again, minimum wage, $7.25 an hour at the federal level. Payments made on an hourly basis. Overtime pay is based on weekly hours worked. Time and 1/2 for hours in excess of 40. Employers must record all hours worked. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of these trickier, thornier issues. You know, what do I have to pay for? What is considered work? What is not? Okay. So waiting time, that's one of the issues that arises fairly frequently. What counts as hours worked? When an employee is unable to use the time effectively for his or her own purposes, and the time is regulated by the employer, what does not count as hours worked? They have to be completely relieved from duty, and time is sufficient to allow the employee to use that time for his or her own purposes. So, sort of the classic example of this is, you know, secretary or administrative personnel at your place of employment who is primarily tasked with answering phones, responding to emails, obviously greeting people as they come in, etc. That kind of job. That employee pulls out a book and does his or her personal reading in between phone calls, emails. When there's nothing else, they are tasked by the employer to complete. That time that the employee spends reading that book has to be paid, because it's just a couple minutes in between, you know, phone calls, responding to emails, etc. That's sort of the classic example of waiting time. Even though she's getting to do what she wants, it's so minimal. You know, the courts are going to say, look, you got to pay the employee for that time. Okay. On call time, certainly it's hours worked when the employee has to stay on the employer's premises, right? They can't go home. They can't do what he or she might want to do. If they're on the premises, you got to pay them. You also have to pay them if they stay so close to the place of employment that he or she cannot use that time for his or her own purposes. What does not count as hours worked? Cell phone, pager, to the extent pagers are still used. But you know, if you're close by, if you're obligated to carry that phone with you, you get a phone call from work. You got to report back to work, you know, within the next 15 minutes, whatever time frame it might be. That is going to be hours worked because you have to stay close to the employer's premises and you are bound by that phone. Conversely, if you get to go home, right, you got to keep a cell phone with you. If you get a call from work, you got to report back to work. But it's one of those, you don't have to be close by, you don't have to be there in 15 minutes, and there is no bright line with respect to the timing. That does not count as hours worked. Short rest periods, meal and rest breaks. Short rest periods are typically 5 to 20 minutes. Generally speaking, you have to pay for those short rest periods. Meal breaks, viewed to be 30 minutes or longer, you do not have to pay for. So it's really an issue of timing. It's an issue of what is expected of the employee when he or she is quote unquote off the clock. Travel time, travel between job sites or offices during the normal workday is compensable work time. So if you typically work in, you know, Philadelphia, you got to go out to Malvern, you got to go out to, you know, Lancaster for a day, and back and forth. Travel between those job sites or offices during the normal workday is compensable work time. You have to pay the employee for that. What does not count as hours worked? Certainly ordinary home to work travel. You don't get paid driving from your home to your work site every day, and that's obviously totally compliant with the law. Special rules apply to travel away from an employee's home community. This can get a little tricky, but the general rule, right, is that when an employee is working, if the employee's standard work hours are 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and for a work event, that employee needs to travel on a Saturday or a Sunday, If that employee is traveling from 9 to 5 on a Saturday or Sunday, that is that employee's normal work hours. Even though it's a Saturday or Sunday, that's compensable work time. Generally speaking, you need to pay for actions that are integral and indispensable part of the principal activity. So questions to consider: does it primarily benefit the employer? Is it required by the employer? Is it necessary to perform the task? So by way of example, right, one of these preliminary activities in the context of a work plan, the employee parks his or her car, gets to the front gate of the plant, but then the employee needs to walk an additional, say 5 minutes to get to his or her workbench. That time, that preliminary activity, engaging in the act of getting to the actual place of work, is an integral part of the job, right? You need to be there. You need to be at the workbench to do the work. That time is typically going to be compensable. You got to pay for that time.